Did you hear what just happened? A young African president just stood in front of the world, looked Donald Trump dead in the eye, and said words that no one had the courage to say before. This wasn't just a speech. This was a moment that shook global politics to its core. Ibrahim Traoré didn't ask for respect. He demanded it. And in doing so, he may have just started a revolution. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will make history. Did he really just say that to Trump? The words echoed across social media, newsrooms, and living rooms around the world. It wasn't just a headline, it was history in the making. Something unforgettable had just taken place at the prestigious Global Leadership Summit in Geneva, where the most powerful leaders of the modern world had come together under one roof to discuss global peace, economic development, and the future of humanity. In a room glowing with polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and guarded by elite security, presidents, billion ministers, and monarchs sat shoulder to shoulder. The world watched, expecting formal speeches and political small talk, but no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. From the corner of the Grand Hall, Ibrahim Traoré, the young and fearless president of Burkina Faso, sat quietly. His eyes sharp, focused, unblinking, dressed in his military uniform with the flag of his nation proudly on his chest. He was surrounded by global giants, leaders of nations with nuclear weapons, vast economies, and deep histories of dominance. And across from him sat Donald J. Trump, the controversial and ever bold former president of the United States. Trump, never one to hold back his opinions, had just taken the stage. His speech was fiery, confident, and as always, full of provocative remarks, but it was one sentence that changed everything. He looked around the room, smiled slightly, and said, "You know, when you look at Africa, you just see chaos and corruption. You don't know who's running what, and honestly, it's a mess. Total disaster." Some laughed awkwardly, others exchanged glances, unsure whether to react. A few nodded in agreement, perhaps out of habit or fear. But not Traoré. He didn't smile, he didn't flinch, he didn't check to see who was watching. He simply stood up, not rushed, not angry, just calm and grounded. He took a few steps forward, each one louder than the last in the silence of the hall, and then standing in the center of the stage with the eyes of the world upon him. He spoke. "With all due respect, Mr. Trump, you have no idea what Africa truly is." You could hear a pin drop, heads turned, cameras zoomed in, some gasped, others reached for their phones. Security looked alert, sensing the tension. No one had expected this. A leader from one of the world's poorest nations was now speaking directly to one of the world's most powerful men. Traoré's voice was steady and clear. He didn't insult. He simply spoke his truth. Africa is not chaos. Africa is not Caracas history. Africa is resilience. Africa is hope. He looked directly at Trump, eyes unwavering. "When your ancestors came to our lands, they didn't find chaos. They found gold, knowledge, kingdoms, and peace. What came after was colonialism, slavery, looting. Generations were wiped out, borders were drawn with no thought, families were torn apart, and even after independence we were left with systems built to fail." A few murmurs were heard in the crowd. Some nodded, some looked uncomfortable. "Wes, we have problems," Traoré continued. "But do you know why? Because our minerals fuel your phones. Our cocoa sweetens your desserts. Our oil keeps your engines running, and in return our children get hunger. Our youth get unemployment, and our leaders get judged, shamed, or bought." He then paused, looked around the room, and let the silence speak for a moment. "You call us corrupt. But what do you call the Western companies that pay bribes to steal our resources? What do you call the tax havens, where African money disappears? What do you call the silence when our people die in forgotten wars you helped start?" The audience was frozen. Even Trump leaned slightly forward, eyes locked on Traoré. Then Ibrahim Traoré told the story. "There is a boy in my country. He is 12 years old. His name is Emmanuel. Every day he wakes up before the sun rises. He walks 6 miles just to fetch clean water for his mother and siblings. On the way he passes gold mines, gold that doesn't belong to him, gold that's shipped to Europe and America. He studies by candlelight. He eats 1 meal a day, and yet he dreams. He dreams of becoming an engineer, not to leave for the West, but to build his own Africa." Traoré's voice softened. "That boy's dream is not a visa. It's not a plane ticket. It's justice. It's dignity. And I stand here today for him and for millions like him." By now many in the room had tears in their eyes. Even journalists hardened by years of political speeches felt something shift. What had started as a confrontation was now a call to conscience. "We don't need sympathy," Traoré concluded. "We need partners, we need trade, not aid. We are not your burden. We are your equals." As he finished, there was a long silence, and then a single clap, then another, and soon the room erupted into a standing ovation. Presidents from Latin America stood, prime ministers from Asia joined in. Even a few European leaders looked visibly moved. For the first time in a long time, the summit felt real alive. Human. Donald Trump remained seated, his expression unreadable. Later he would tell the press, "Look, I don't agree with everything he said. But I'll tell you one thing, that guy has guts." But the story didn't end there. It was only just beginning. As the room fell into a stunned silence, Ibrahim Traoré stood tall at the center of the grand hall, not with anger in his voice, but with a power that came from truth, from pain, and from love for his people. His presence alone was striking. A young man, barely in his mid-30s, standing among world leaders 3 times his age. His military uniform bore the scars of struggle, the resilience of his nation. But his words would carry the weight of a continent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You see chaos when you look at Africa. I see colors. I see communities. I see 1,000 languages and 10,000 songs." He turned slowly, addressing the entire room, not just the man who had sparked his response. "I see mothers who walk miles to feed their children. I see youth who build businesses without power or Wi-Fi. I see mothers who walk miles to feed their children. I see youth who build businesses without power or Wi-Fi. I see artists who turn war-torn streets into poetry and dance. That's my Africa." The room was frozen in attention. No one checked their phones, no one whispered. Everyone, leaders, journalists, security guards, was locked into every word. He said, "You speak of corruption." Traoré continued, his voice firm. "But you never speak of how it survives. Corruption does not grow in the shadows of Africa alone. It is watered from offshore accounts in Europe. It is fertilized in banks that turn a blind eye. It is protected by law firms in New York and London." He paused, scanning the room, letting the truth sink in. "You call us corrupt, but what do you call the billion-dollar companies that extract our gold, our oil, our diamonds, while our schools collapse? What do you call the CEOs who sips champagne, while children in Burkina Faso dig through dirt with their bare hands?" Then came the moment that changed everything. Traoré's voice softened as if pulling the room closer. "Let me tell you a story, a real story, about a boy named Emmanuel. He is 12 years old. He lives in a small village in my country, Burkina Faso. Every morning before the sun rises, Emmanuel wakes up and walks 6 miles, not to go to school, not to play, but to fetch water for his family. 6 miles barefoot, every single day." The room was silent again. You could hear people breathing. He walks past gold mines, gold that ends up in your jewelry stores, your smartphones, your luxury vaults. But Emmanuel has never seen the inside of a classroom with electricity. His school has no roof. His mother cooks over firewood. His father died in a mine collapse, digging for resources he would never touch. Some in the audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. And yet, Traoré added, "Emmanuel has a dream, not to leave Africa, not to escape to America. His dream is to become an engineer, to build wells, roads, and hospitals in his own village. He wants to give back, not run away." Traoré's voice cracked just slightly, but he didn't stop. That boy doesn't need pity, he needs power. He needs opportunity. He needs a system that doesn't steal his future before he's even had a chance to live it. He looked directly at Trump. "You say Africa is failing, but perhaps the truth is this: Africa was never allowed to succeed." A long pause, then Traoré added, "We're not asking for charity. We're asking for change. A change in how the world sees us. A change in how deals are made. A change in how stories are told." He stepped forward closer to the center of the stage. "I am not here to apologize for my continent. I am here to announce its arrival. We are not your experiment. We are not your charity case. We are not waiting for permission. Africa's ready to stand. And I, Ibrahim Traoré, will stand first." A murmur began to rise in the room. It started slowly, a few claps, some nods, then a louder applause, then more, and suddenly a standing ovation. Leaders from Latin America stood first, moved by the honesty and courage. Then came ministers from Asia, presidents from the Caribbean, and even officials from European nations. Even those who disagreed with Traoré's political views could not deny the truth in his words. Cameras were rolling. Journalists were scribbling notes furiously. Social media was on fire. The clip was already being shared online, cut into reels and quotes. The hashtag #Traoré Speaks Truth was trending in dozens of countries before the session even ended. And standing in the middle of it all was a man who had come to the summit as a young African president and was now leaving as a global symbol of resistance and hope. Donald Trump, seated in the front row, didn't clap, but he didn't interrupt either. He simply sat there, arms folded, a curious look in his eyes, as though trying to process what had just happened. Later, when asked by a reporter what he thought of Traoré's comments, Trump replied, "I've heard a lot of speeches in my time, some boring, some good. That one, that was powerful." I don't agree with everything he said, but I respect the guy's fire. But the real story wasn't about Trump. It was about Africa finding its voice in front of the world. And the man who delivered that voice, Ibrahim Traoré, was now being celebrated not just as a president but as a revolutionary. Back in Burkina Faso, thousands gathered in the streets waving flags, chanting his name. Murals were painted overnight. Children wore shirts with his face. Radio hosts played clips of his speech every hour. And across Africa, millions felt a new sense of pride, because someone had finally spoken their truth at the highest stage. Ibrahim Traoré had not just spoken for himself. He had spoken for the farmers in Ghana, the miners in Congo, the street, the vendors in Nigeria, and the school children in Kenya. He had spoken for Emmanuel and the millions like him whose dreams had been ignored for too long in the world. The world was finally listening. Within just a few hours of the summit's conclusion, the internet exploded. Clips of Ibrahim Traoré's bold speech, his voice, his passion, his fearless stance against a global superpower, spread like wildfire. Social media platforms across the world were flooded. The hashtag #Atui, True or Speaks Truth, surged to the #1 trending topic globally. From Nairobi to New York, people shared the video, quoted his words, and celebrated the moment a young African leader changed the tone of international politics. Mainstream media picked up the story. Headlines read, "The African Lion roars at Global Summit. Traoré challenges Trump and wins the world's respect. Burkina Faso's president sparks global movement." Millions were moved, not just by what he said, but by how he said it: calm, brave, honest. In Africa, the impact was seismic. Young people, especially, felt something they hadn't felt in a long time when looking at a leader: inspiration. This wasn't just another politician speaking in carefully crafted statements. This was one of their own, speaking the truth without fear in a room filled with power and privilege. A 19-year-old university student in Senegal tweeted, "For the first time in my life I feel proud to be African. Thank you, Ibrahim Traoré." In Nigeria, a rap artist released a freestyle titled "We Are Not Cows," using Traoré's words as the hook. In Kenya, a schoolteacher printed copies of the speech and handed them to her students as a reading assignment. In Mali, a street artist painted a giant mural of Traoré, holding the African. Even outside Africa, people were paying attention. International activists, journalists, and influencers began using their platforms to talk about Africa's untapped potential and the systemic injustices Traoré had highlighted. Suddenly, conversations around African agency, stolen wealth, and global inequality were happening in places that had long ignored them. And what about Donald Trump? When asked about Traoré's remarks in a later interview with the U.S. news outlet, Trump responded with his usual candor. "Look, I don't agree with the guy. I think he's wrong about some things, but I'll tell you, he's got guts. He speaks from the heart, and I respect that." But at this point, it didn't really matter what Trump thought, because the story wasn't about Trump anymore. The real story was about a shift, a global realization that Africa was done whispering. Traoré had tapped into something deeper than politics. It sparked a movement, a spiritual awakening, a cultural reawakening, a sense of pride and purpose that had been sleeping under years of foreign domination, corruption, and hopelessness. And he didn't stop at just one speech. Just a few weeks after the Geneva summit, President Traoré launched what he called the Africa First Initiative. The goal was clear and bold: to keep African resources in African hands. The program included new contracts with local companies to mine and process gold, oil, and other minerals, strict anti-corruption laws with real enforcement, even targeting officials within his own government, youth empowerment programs, offering scholarships, startup grants, and training in agriculture, tech, and education. A continental task force to investigate illegal wealth transfers and repatriate stolen assets from overseas accounts. And here's the most amazing part: dozens of other African countries expressed interest in joining the initiative. Ghana, Mali, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and even oil-rich Nigeria began sending delegations to Ouagadougou to discuss partnerships. Leaders who had once operated in fear of offending foreign powers now began speaking with newfound confidence. "We are not poor," one leader said during a televised panel. "We are rich nations with stolen futures. It's time we take them." Ibrahim Traoré, once mocked by Western critics as a military populist, was now being called a visionary, and among the youth he had become legendary. They called him the African Lion, not because he was violent, not because he wanted war, but because he was fearless, fierce, and protective across the continent. Children wore T-shirts with his the phrase, "Africa First." Murals of him appeared in schoolyards and public squares. Musicians wrote songs in his honor, celebrating the man who gave Africa a new voice. And yet Traoré remained humble. In one of his latest speeches he said, "I am just one man. I cannot save Africa, but I can remind her of her power. The real change will come not from me, but from the people, from the youth, from the mothers, from the farmers and teachers and builders. He ended that speech with words that would be printed on posters across the continent. We are no longer waiting. We are rising and rise. They did not with violence, not with hate, but with vision, unity, and dignity. Ibrahim Traoré had done more than confronted global superpower. He had ignited a fire, a movement of minds and hearts. And while the road ahead would be difficult, one thing was now certain. Africa had found its voice, and the world would never be the same. Sometimes it takes just one voice to wake up millions. Ibrahim Traoré's words shook the world, not because he attacked, but because he stood for something greater. In the time of power games and politics, he reminded us of what true leadership looks like: courage, truth, and love for your people. And whether you agree with him or not, one thing is clear. Africa is rising, and it's not asking for permission anymore. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for more amazing content. Your support means the world to me. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories.